All righty, we are going to get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to night 2 of our budget presentations. It is February 1st, 2024, Ipswich School Committee meeting. This meeting is being recorded. So we'll call to order at 7:03. Jimmy, would you please read the district mission statement for us, please?
Of course. Ipswich Public Schools aspires to empower all students to be global citizens who are effective communicators, analytical problem solvers, and savvy consumers of information. We propose to do this through an emphasis on communication, critical thinking, creativity, self-management, perseverance, and collaboration. Students will be active partners in authentic learning, offering voice and choice and demonstrating competency.
Thank you. Do we have any announcements or special acknowledgements tonight? All right, I have no remarks from the chair. Do we have any public comments? Seeing none, we will move on to our second night of budget presentations. I think we will start off with questions. I think we've had 24 more hours to spend with the budget. So I know we've had some questions that have come in over email, and I have some questions as well. So I think we'll open it up for questions from the committee. If anyone wants to start, or I could start.
Gage, you have a preference of, like, person by person? You want to go school by school, just so we're a little organized? I want to make sure we're...
Let's do school by school. Does that work?
on either one.
Or
Okay.
let's start with like general questions that don't have to do with school by school.
Okay.
Or I have a couple of those.
I
too.
think just for the order of the evening, we'll deal with the schools, buildings, the budget specifically first, and then I'll let these guys go. And then we'll do the capital plan and the override calculator review.
Okay, great.
Okay? Does that make sense?
Yep. I guess I'll start, if that's okay. So I just had, I guess, mostly questions for Tom. So I just want to make sure I'm like understanding everything correctly.
Professional salary reserve.
Tom,
Sorry.
you're going to be up.
Sorry.
All right, good go.
Okay, so page 9, the circuit breaker funds. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
In the budget book, not last night's slides.
In the budget book, correct. The circuit breaker funds, so the orange is money that we're spending, money that we have that we're spending to offset outer district costs, like the 395?
Yes,
Okay. And then the blue is money that that is at least the 699 that's coming in, so that 699 is anticipated.
that's
Reimbursements
anticipated
from
revenue to
FY24.
receive next year based on this year's expenditures at 75%.
Okay, that's fine. Just wanna make sure.
Circuit breaker, we get 75% of a reimbursement from the Commonwealth. Now, from year to year, the legislature can raise that or lower that or do what they do. So this budget is based on 75%, which is a pretty reasonable.
So we're spending less, I wrote down, we're spending less than we have spent in previous years, and is the reason that we're dipping into circuit breaker less because we're dipping into other things more, and we kind of want to keep circuit breaker higher?
So
or-
the 699, the 699,000 that we anticipate to bring in will, of course, we're spending money throughout this year, right? So it's not, this doesn't, a third bar, I suppose, could be what the balance is, which I present to you every month anyways.
Okay.
So this is based on the net of the spending throughout this year to pay special education bills and what we're anticipating to get next year, and then take half of that. This 395,000 represents
half of what we
50%
have.
of the
Yep.
projected balance
Yep.
on July 1st. So the projected balance is, what, 780?
Okay, thank you.
699 money will come in, but money is also being spent at the same time.
Yeah. And then if we back up a couple pages, page 7. obviously,
7?
yes.
Yep.
So obviously FY '25 is lower because ESSER's gone. Seventh, I know, it probably depends, but does 769,000 represent sort of normal historically?
Yeah, so what that is,
Doesn't really have a
the difference
pre-ESSER.
between the 1.3 million in state and federal grant funding this year and the 769 projected next year is the elimination of all ESSER funds,
Yep.
the reduction in Title I funds, and level funding of other existing grants. So we're not projecting a loss of any other grants, which we
Right.
obviously keeping our fingers crossed on, but that's probably pretty reliable, you know, IDEA and
Yep.
Titles II, Titles IV, so forth. So we're projecting that those would be level funded. And we're taking, you know, the state's, you know, guidance in anticipating or budgeting for what we believe to be a cut. So even if we didn't see a loss or a projected loss in Title I funds, the number would be lower because $480,000 in ESSER funds
Yep.
have now off the table.
Yep. And then the school choice graph on the next page.
Yep.
So the orange, we had a breakdown last night of that's what we have, what we're spending choice funds on
Yes.
in FY '25. And the blue, tell me what the blue represents?
Blue represents the revenue we're projecting to receive next year from the students that we have enrolled.
Why does that seem so high? I mean, because we don't
We
have,
have, what do you mean?
I guess I'm just not understanding.
Because we don't have a lot of choice students, is that?
No. I mean, we have, yeah, I guess how many choice students do we have at a given time?
That's what I'm, have
Because if we
that.
get $5,000 per student, I'm just not seeing how we get to $375,000.
So we have 59 students. And we have 59 students coming in, and we have 15 students going out, which represents net income of 368,000. The 374 is slightly higher because I didn't full, you know, it's not, you know, netted out. I re-netted it out on my, but it's 368,000. But 374 represents our receipts from 59 students. Now, that's a combination of two amounts. One amount for a regular education student and a different amount for a special education student. So it's a combination of both. But we'd have 59 choice students next year. Now, you guys have opened up choice to certain grades. So we very well may get more choice students as the, you know, as the choice enrollment process, registration process rather, goes on.
Other sort of general questions before we get into building specific?
Yeah, I'd have just one. Tom, could you, on page 4 of the book, we have the proposed budget at the top and then the budgeted from the outside sources for FY '29, the 2.9 million.
Yep.
That's covering expenses above and beyond the $39.6 million budget, or is that offset?
Those are offsets. Because they are expenditures for which there is a separate revenue stream. Like taking well, really any of them, the first one or even the second one's a little more obvious, the bus transportation, right? Parents pay a bus fee for their students to ride the bus, so that represents revenue received from bus fees that we would expend for that purpose.
Okay.
So because each of these funds has a specific purpose, and we can only spend the revenues from those funds on that purpose. We have a little more leeway, as we've discussed, in things like school choice.
Yep.
And even in the now, growing the use of the school food service revolving fund, we can only spend things that are germane to the operation of the school service program. So one of the reasons why I, went through some of my remarks last night was we took we appreciated sort of a square footage of the size of size of the kitchens. And what is expected, what does it cost to run electricity and heat and water and gas and power and cleaning, right? We're offsetting some of the cost of custodial work that it takes to clean the kitchens as well, so.
And that, similarly, that's what's annotated in the detailed budget. Is that all set?
The far right columns
Yep.
on the budget
Okay.
pages themselves, yes.
Okay, got it, thank you. I just wanted to confirm that my assumptions were correct. Thanks.
I have a question about the stabilization fund. Pardon me if I missed it yesterday. There was a lot of good information yesterday. How is that used in budgets? I know, does that have to be approved at the town meeting?
It does.
And we're using that for this, do we use that every budget that we do?
Yes, so there are two stabilization funds, both of which need to be approved by a town meeting. There's a general, there's a school stabilization fund, sort of the general one that we're talking about, or we'll talk about in more detail with the budget override calculator and so forth. Then there's a special education stabilization fund. But both of those, in order to access those funds, town meeting specifically has to approve that ask.
And where, does it say how much we're going to ask for this time? I'm sure it does.
Well, no, so we'll go to, I guess, on page 3, which is the overall sort of, big picture view. And the very last row, or the last 3 rows in the sort of bottom right, where it says total FY25 budget proposal at $39,616,403, which is the figure represented above the last, at row 14.
Yep.
Then the town contribution, meaning what has town hall allowed us to project as far as the schools, the town's contribution against the tax levy to fund the FY25 budget. And the difference between those two numbers is the shortfall, which is designed to be, accessed from the stabilization fund.
Yeah. Because I know last year, there were a lot of questions about, can't you pull, like for the roofs, can you pull from the stabilization fund to cover those, instead of, so I just want to understand.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit more about the stabilization fund when we go over the budget calculator later.
Okay.
Like why it was created and how we sort of use it to project over time
Okay.
to fill that gap.
Sorry, I'm going to go back, because now, as you said that, I want to clarify one more thing. So and I'm going to use just the round numbers. So if there's expected 38 million from the town,
Yes,
and this year's proposed budget is 39,
yes.
but there's 2.9 from those outside sources, why would we need to, doesn't that show that we have a surplus? I feel like I'm missing something
So
there.
the 2.9 are used to bring the budget down to 39 million. So there is an operating budget.
Okay.
That is the total cost of operating for the school district, that includes outside sources, but isn't a direct ask from the taxpayers of Ipswich.
Okay, got it. I misunderstood the way you explained it, or
I
I
apologize.
misunderstood. No, it was my misunderstanding. Got it. Thank you for clarifying.
I don't know if this came up last night, since I had to leave a little early, and forgive me since I don't fundamentally understand this very well, but is there any expectation that the town might see any of the, what was called the millionaire's tax, but I think is the fair share amendment money that is collected, or has that not been made clear to us?
So I believe the answer to that is yes. What has not been made clear is what those allocations will be.
Okay.
I think that will be part of the legislature's job. I know, Governor Healy presented her budget recommendations last week or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And now that's going to go through the legislative process, which will take all spring, really.
Okay, so that'll be last minute, if anything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, as will, Chapter 70, all of the state aids will be relatively last minute.
Okay.
As they always are.
Right, and they typically come back around for the fall town meeting where we'll receive supplemental appropriations, but you can't count on those.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
I have questions that are directly for the principals and Tracy. Should we do those now so that you're not here all night?
Yeah. So do you want to start with elementaries?
Yeah. Okay. So my first question, I guess, is for Amy and Peter. Last year at this time, we heard a lot about the need for assistant principals in your building. I would like to hear, I guess, from each of you, how the roles are defined, what you do differently in the building, how is the building different this year? Obviously, it's going well. We've heard great feedback, but I'd just like to hear about those roles and how like, what are the responsibilities and how are those responsibilities different than your responsibilities?
Should we come to the mic or?
Yes, please, because,
Wanna do this?
and while we can hear it, well, and hear that microphone is for the TV viewers.
Yep. All right. So I have a few notes about that question. I think the starting place is to say that the assistant principals can do pretty much everything that principals can do, and be able to sort of fill in that role, right? So, but I guess then the question is, well, what if the principal's there and the assistant principal's there, what are they doing? And I think the thing to understand is that assistant principals make it possible for principals to do the things that make schools better. And so, you know, every morning we have certain tasks that are required to run the building. The first thing that happens every morning is we have to figure out where our substitutes are going, you know, who's out, who needs coverage and things like that. So I can do that. I can come in and do that, but if I'm working on that, then I'm not able to handle anything else that comes up at the beginning of the day. So I have to push those things down a little bit, right? So the assistant principal is able to sort of step in and sort of deal with these things, okay? I think the other piece, and I can give lots of specific examples, but from a general standpoint, assistant principals are able to handle all of those things that are not on your agenda that just kind of come up. You have you know, you come in and there's an email from a parent because a kindergartner got called a poopy head by a second grader, right? So that's something that's very important to that person. It's not going to make the school better, but somebody's got to address that, right? So if the assistant principal is taking care of that, I don't have to worry about that, so I can stay on target with whatever else I'm doing. So, you know, I think sort of if you take the analogy, I don't know if you've ever heard the analogy of you got a jar, right? And you've got stones, which are the things that are really important, right? And your pebbles, which are things that are pretty important too. And then you got sand, which is all of the details, right? It's very easy as a principal to get caught up in all of the sand, which can fill up your bucket, and there's no room for the things, the stones, that make a difference, right? So with the assistant principals, we can prioritize getting into classrooms, having conversations about instruction, you know, meeting with stakeholders, sort of preparing for meetings, you know, that we're running, sort of all of the things that make the school better. We can prioritize those and know that we're going to be able to do the things that we put on our calendar because the sand that comes up isn't going to get in the way. So out on the playground, a kid makes a bad choice, 6 kids are in the nurse's office, right? So if I don't have an assistant principal, whatever I'm doing at that moment has to stop so I can go and intervene and address that to sort of figure out what happens. I no longer have to do that because I have an assistant principal that can step in and sort of fill in those things. The other thing is that the assistant principals do a lot of that work that is meaningful. They are also in classrooms. They are also talking with teachers about instruction. They're also getting down on the rug with a kid, reading to them to help them re-regulate. You know, they are working with teachers, building the relationships to support them so that everybody continues to sort of, you know, move forward. You know, one of the things that I prioritized in the very beginning of the year is I made sure that one or the other of us was at every lunch and recess, you know, for the first couple of weeks of school, because we're creating a foundation of one of those unstructured places that can cost us tons of time if we don't get off on the right foot. And so I'm building relationships with kids. I'm complimenting, you know, like noticing when they're doing the things that we like. You know, we're lining up, we're talking about this, you know, we're sort of establishing the routines. These are things that you do not pay your principal to do all year. But we're sort of getting those things up and established to create the kind of culture of what we're going to have. And now, I show up to recess and lunch, because I want to see kids. I show up, 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there, but I don't need to be there all of the time because the two of us have sort of created the infrastructure. So rather than spending our afternoons cleaning up lunch and recess messes, we're in good shape. We have a little thing here, a little thing there. So, I can give you a million examples, but I think if you were to ask an assistant principal, what did you do today? A lot of times the answer is, I have no idea. And that's because, and then they'll think about it, it's like, oh, well, I did meet with this person, I did do this. And that's because a lot of times the sort of running a school is all of these little things that kind of pop up. And you need somebody that's able to handle those things, not because it makes the school better, because it makes the school continue to run. So we're able to do the things better because we have somebody to help us with all of those things. Now, Amy and I also handle kid issues, and we also talk with parents, and we also do those things, but it's a team effort. And a principal is doing their job if things that are the little stuff don't even get to our desk a lot of the time because they don't need to. So I think that's the easiest answer, is that they allow us to do our jobs well in terms of what sort of makes the school better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think, and maybe Amy can speak to having been at Winthrop without an assistant principal and now with one, because a lot of what we heard was, you can't possibly do all the observations and be in
Sure.
charge of all of the teachers without an assistant. So how has that changed?
It's been life-changing, truly. We do our best to try to delineate some roles, but I think ultimately we are just that, we're a team, and it's always nice to have a team to work with when you're trying to build initiatives or make change, or, have somebody to run something by. Solely, I definitely handle all of the budget, purchase, ordering, those kinds of things. I do solely the newsletter every week. The MTSS team, our student support team, was something that I was trying to manage last year. That is now much more of a team approach, and we're much, much more effective. It has been one of our biggest goals this year. We both respond to any student issues or discipline, but it is so much more efficient. For the first time since I've come to Ipswich, over, I think it was school vacation, I was caught up. I have never been caught up. That might not mean caught up with your daily emails, but like my observations were done, the budget was in, like the school council agenda was planned. School council falls solely under the principals as well. And I think that sometimes in this culture we get caught up with understanding that like middle schools and high schools run differently. Sometimes they may be larger, sometimes they're not. I came from an elementary school before Ipswich that had 700 kids, but we all have the same responsibilities to do. It doesn't matter how large your school is. We all have to run a school council meeting. We all have to do the teacher observations. We all have to prepare a budget. We all have to answer. And simply being able to be more efficient with that and more prompt, I think has made me more effective in being hands-on with the teachers and hands-on with the students. We've been able to start a few things up, like Nikki was able to start up a student newspaper club, which was great. That grew from student interest, but we've been able to bring more activities into the building, and just really taking a breather and having that joy of the job, which is why I hope that we all got into the principalship to begin with. It's just 100% more manageable.
And does Nikki also do the observations?
Yes, yep, Nikki does half of the observations. Yep, which, and I'll just, in case you don't know how much that is, I know we gave detailed data on that last year. Last year, I had 45 people to evaluate. Every single person that has been teaching longer than 3 years has to have a minimum of at least 3 reports. a year into a 2-year cycle. So sometimes in the year, it's a formative or a summative evaluation and an observation. And then any teacher under 3 years requires 5 observations, a formative and a summative. So if you have 5 teachers in their first 3 years, you're looking at 45 reports just there. And, it takes, if you want that to be a quality report and you're doing a pre-conference, a post-conference, giving those, good feedback, and then it's not just checking off the box, that takes time to not only write, but to have conversations and make those connections. And I feel in the past, I was trying as hard as I could just to try to finish them. And now I feel like the people that I have and the people that Nikki have, we have been able to really have much more time for them and to turn over those in a timely fashion, which they deserve. Yep.
I have a follow-up question for Tracy, and it's like how you work with the principals, but I guess one last part of it, in case, I don't want you to sit down, get back up. So as far as like curriculum planning and your regular meetings around that, is that something you as principals do with Tracy, or is it assistant principals? What is that like?
Both. It's so much, it's so much, it's everything. First of all, we have our Compass committees that Tracy oversees. So on the Compass committees for each discipline, right this year we're doing STE, Science, Technology, and Engineering. That's where the bulk of our work is. So we have a whole committee for that. We have the committee for the ELA Compass committee in choosing the new curriculum and every other discipline, right? Music, art, all of that. Tracy and Peter and I meet every 2 weeks with our own agenda items where we're planning things. This year, we've talked a lot about the new dyslexia mandate. We've talked about professional development, how we're going to organize it, a myriad of things. Tracy also meets individually with the assistant principals too, and sometimes their topics are different than ours, just from a management perspective. I'm sure I've left a lot of things out. We've had site visits this year that we have planned. We look at professional development. I'm sure I'm leaving a few things out and trying to rattle it all off the top of my head.
Okay, I think that answers it. Thank you.
Has it ever been done, and apologize if it has been, that there's a bit of a conversation prior to presenting the budget at the town meeting to talk about, these 2 positions were added last year, right? The benefit of that and how we take these decisions very seriously, sort of like the FEFIs, where we're given that money and then we go back and say, this is what we did with it and this is how it's been helpful. Would that be something to do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we present the budget at town meeting, there's an opportunity to sort of tell the story of what we did with the funds last year and where the budget is and why it's changing in whatever we're asking for at town meeting. And the other place is when we present to the finance committee, because they're going to ask these questions too, because I think the public should know we funded these positions, so we want to see and hear how valuable they've been. Yeah, definitely. So I have like a really particular question, just so I'm understanding where numbers and bodies are going. So for Peter, so at Doyon, there was one FTE para rolled into your budget from ESSER funding. What grade is that going to, or where is that?
It'll be one of the special ed para educators that's part of our model. So it isn't necessarily the 4th grade or the 2nd grade one. It's just one of the ones there, and that came from the K1 position that we eliminated that had a para educator with it.
That para's
Yes.
being.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay. And I don't know if you have your book, but let's see. And there was, in health services, I just noticed a jump in the nurse professional salaries that I don't remember hearing about last night, so I just wasn't sure where that number came from.
I think that's just the cost of the FTE.
But it's a,
New nurse.
It's a different nurse than we had last year.
okay.
Yeah,
so it's just a new nurse
it's just
and a
teacher
different
salary is what that
Okay.
is.
I
And
just,
that's the
FTEs didn't
actual.
go up, but the.
Right.
The
went up
FTE is
quite
the
a bit.
same,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
And she is amazing,
She is.
for what it's worth.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. And then, last thing for Peter, I think, in special education, I noticed there's some, I just haven't noticed it in budgets before, which is totally possible, I missed it. There's some line items for, under special education for home services, and I don't see them in years past. Is that something
So,
we provide home services for certain students?
yeah,
that-
sometimes we do, and a lot of the times it's sort of according to need. We might identify that a student that has needs in school would also benefit from some support at home. Some case, it might be like a student with a device, a communication device. We might want to make sure that we're training the parent on how to use the device as well. I think that's an example.
Behavior plans, so that there is connection between the language we're using, the incentives, the reinforcers, rewards, a connection between home and school. As sometimes the students that might need home services are very involved, nonverbal, the students that we've been able to keep in our buildings because of our inclusion and our strong special education program. And so there has to be some of that carryover between the home environment and the school environment.
No, I could definitely see that. I just hadn't seen it.
And there are times
On
when
the
we
school
might
budget before.
not need all that much. I mean, like if in a particular year, they're just, and it's, a lot of times it's not something that's ongoing. It's something where there's a need to address something then and there, you do it, and then it has its benefits, so.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. And then a couple questions for Amy. And again, I probably missed this last night because just a lot of information was coming at us. I see, so let me see, I'm on page 40, if anyone wants to follow along. So I'm just trying to track your, so first of all, what people wrote about the narrative, the highlights and the narrative is super helpful. So I don't know if you wrote that or you guys wrote that, but it's really helpful. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm trying to just track, so 3 RBTs down in pre-K.
So you'll see an increase on the therapist RBT line item under special education.
Okay.
So that is just children aging up.
Okay.
So we had those RBTs at the preschool level next year,
Yep.
and they're dispersing out to other grades. So also in that line item,
I see one in kindergarten.
for special education is the CODA position that was coming over that was ESSER funded.
Yeah.
So it looks like that special education line item really went up a lot. It's really just shifting
Okay.
within the budget.
Okay. And then, this is just sort of, I guess, a question for both of you. I think all of us would benefit from just like a really short explanation of the reading sort of model of delivery. I mean, I know in elementary schools, there's a classroom teacher, but then for reading, there's literacy specialists, there's reading TAs. I just don't understand how that's delivered.
Well, it's a little bit
Just
different
explain it.
at Winthrop because we are reading specialist. Part of her job is reading specialist, and the other part is Title I. And because that's a federally funded grant, we have to really make sure that we're kind of divvying up her services that way. So a reading specialist traditionally will work with students really at any grade level that might need extra supplemental instruction beyond the classroom to make effective progress. So it usually looks like small groups at the students' ability levels or grade levels, pulled out. Sometimes it's a double dose of what they're receiving in the classroom. Sometimes it's previewing. We'll do a lot of progress monitoring on those students to see how they're achieving. And then Title I each year, because we're a targeted assistance school, we send out a survey to teachers and parents, and we say what grade levels would be best served by Title I services, which is more intense instruction, like daily, either 4 to 5 times a week. And we, for the past few years, have targeted grade 1 and grade 2 with that. The reading paras that we have associated with the program help to deliver the instructions. So post-COVID, we have had such an increase of first and second graders qualifying for Title I, and the groups went from what might be a little bit more manageable, like 5 kids at a time, to really trying to take maybe 8 to 10 kids at a time. And so the reading specialist will plan the instruction. She'll have them for like 15 minutes. She'll do the targeted instruction and small reading with them. Then they'll go to the reading para, where the reading specialist has planned perhaps a vocabulary lesson or some scripted lessons to do with them, and so they're able to rotate through. So we're able to take a really big group, but still keep it like 5 students at each table between the reading specialist and the para. So that's pretty specific to Winthrop because of the Title I funding.
Thank you.
And I think, with the dyslexia mandate and all of the assessments that we've done, we've identified kids where they are and who might be a little bit behind in multiple different areas, and then what do you do about it? So it's, okay, we know that kid's behind, what do we do about it? So our literacy specialist has taken all of the data, worked with teachers, identified which kids have sort of similar needs and prioritized them, and then they work for 6 weeks in some kind of, it might be the para-educator that she's providing the lessons for or telling them do it like this. She makes sure that they know what they're doing and they pull the kids and work on that. That's the double dose, so they're not missing their core instruction, and then we track it and see if it's making an impact, and then we adjust, all right, what's the next priority area? So essentially, if we do a really effective job taking all of these kids in the early grades, monitoring their progress, focusing in on needs, then we can eliminate the need for additional supports in the upper grades because we've addressed the problems or the deficits so that kids are able to get up on grade level. So, yeah.
And I'm just going to add to that because I think Peter brings up a really good point about the new dyslexia mandate. So as you know, we need to notify parents if their child is achieving below grade level, but it's not really, the notification is one thing, but it's what are we doing about it? So it's developing an intervention plan. And the hope too is that with the more knowledge that we have with science of reading and dyslexia in general, that you don't have to be identified on an IEP, that we can provide intervention work to close that gap early on. And I always say to parents, your child didn't lose their first tooth at the same time, they didn't walk at the same time. There is definitely a trajectory of learning how to read, and some children break that code in kindergarten, and some children need extra instruction, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specialized special education instruction. It is truly an intervention, and that's what they do. I wish I had 5 of them.
No, that's helpful. So each elementary school has a literacy specialist, some paras that support that, and then the Title I at Winthrop. Okay, thank you. It just helps us to understand
Thank you. Good question.
questions. Any other questions? Let's see.
I do. First, I'll say, though, going through all the budgets, significant effort to, with a 2% increase of going on less than 1% at Winthrop, 1 at the middle school, 6% at the high school, which is less than what I would have expected, even just for step and lane changes. Forget about all the things you've added on top. So incredibly commendable effort from all of you, as well as Tom and Brian. I would say I'm fully supportive of what I've seen so far and what I've put together. Kind of to Kate's point, I have a couple questions, just understand context, and as we do our little road show with the budget across the town, I want to make sure, we can support and further explain it. So just a couple of questions, and Amy, actually, just one for you on the elementary. There's a couple of places where, or particularly that I see in special ed, where there's 5 additions to staff. I think this overlaps a little bit where Kate was going. Can you just talk about those a little bit?
So special ed is probably one of our largest line items. Where specifically are you looking?
I see the increase in therapy assistants from
Yep.
1 to 5, and then paraeducators from 7 to 8. Can you just talk about those a little bit?
Sure.
The additions.
Yep. So the first is what we were just talking about, the shift of the 3 RBTs from preschool. If you go back to last year, you'll see that there were 5 RBTs at the preschool level. Now there are only 2. So those 3 have come over into that therapy assistant line. So it just means that there are like grades K and up now. So that's 3 of them, which is why a huge jump. Last night I spoke about the CODA position that was ESSER funded. So that is coming into that line too, because we need to account for that. So that's truly the 4 positions. And then the para position, we added a para at grade 1 this year due to student needs. So that position will move forward to grade 2 next year. Yep.
One more, sorry, about, what is it about? It is about co-teaching. Can you just give me a quick rundown of which grades have co-teaching in each of your schools? And then also, do the classrooms that don't have co-teachers all have paras?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. And sort of where are we going with the co-teaching model? Are we sort of
Sure.
plateauing? or-
So at the pre-K level and the K level, those are the classrooms that have full-time paras, okay? So our 2 preschool classrooms and our 3 kindergarten classrooms do have full-time paras, which is developmentally appropriate for early childhood. And then after kindergarten, it is really based on student IEPs. And so we're looking at what is in the IEPs and what are the needs for that. So it shifts every year based upon the group of students moving forward. So should I talk about this year or next year, where the co-teaching classes will be?
It's next year.
Okay, so for FY '25, we are going to have co-teaching class in 3rd grade, 2 in 3rd grade, so that's an addition. We are planning to have 2 in 4th grade, which is the same as this year, and 2 in 5th grade. We did have, the previous year, we moved 1 co-teacher to a more traditional pull-out model because of the need for students that needed a rule-based reading program that's very hard to deliver in the classroom. So the difference is this year we have 1 co-teaching classroom at 5th grade. It's not as a high-need class, 2 in 4th grade, and 1 in 3rd grade.
So we have 2 special ed teaching fellows in 2nd grade that are essentially co-teaching, and we have a 4th grade and a 3rd grade. But those grades also have special ed teachers that service the other 2 classrooms. So depending on, sort of when we're making placement decisions, in some cases we'll have a co-teaching model, and in some cases it's supported by the special educator, and in some cases special ed paras, according to what the IEP needs are.
Then in a perfect world, would you have more co-teaching, or you feel like it's you're
I think
a
the
good
most
place where you are?
inclusive model ideally is, you've got, it would be amazing if we had a model that allowed every classroom with students with disabilities having a co-teacher in there in order for the 2 to really collaborate. You've got an expert on specialized instruction and you have an expert in the core curriculum. The 2 of them working together can really make accessible content for everybody. And then it's not, oh, these are the special ed kids, these are the kids with disabilities, and this is everybody else. It's like everybody is benefiting from the support of both. So that's your A standard, your gold standard model for special ed delivery in most cases. And it would be amazing if we could do that at all grade levels. That's very challenging. It also, really effective co-teaching requires relationship planning time, sort of there are other components that are also resource intensive, if you will, but it's by far the gold standard. It's a great way to do it.
I just want to make one correction because I forgot about my 1st grade co-teaching class. I don't want to slight those amazing educators. We do have a co-teaching class at 1st grade this year that will be moving forward to 2nd grade.
Other questions for elementary administrators? Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks. All right. Any questions for middle school? I actually don't have any.
I don't have any questions.
To
for me.
cough on everyone this time.
Not because you have COVID, or used to have COVID.
Used to.
I don't have any questions for you, so.
Anybody?
I don't know.
Anybody?
I was interested in just, I don't know if it's that big of a category or not, but the instructional software.
Yes.
Just what was that used for in the past and why is it no longer going to be?
Yeah, so that was 1/3 of our iReady.
Okay.
So originally, that was in that line item. 2/3 of it was part of ESSER. So now, if you look down and see under teaching materials, under English and under math, you see a larger number there. So those are the other 2/3, plus that one just transferred down. You know, it looks like a nice savings, but it's just elsewhere.
All right, you are
Anybody else?
off the hook, I guess.
Oh,
Thank you.
For now.
For now.
Run, Peter,
Elementaries
run.
are always challenging, I think. All right, high school.
Hello again?
Hello again. I just had a quick follow-up. I know I asked last night about the adjustment counselor. I just think I would be curious to know if, not tonight, but just sort of in general, if there's any data, and I don't not support adjustment counselors by any stretch, but in the effort of making data-driven decisions, I'd be curious to know if there's any data to back up the effectiveness of really, just some of these ESSER positions we've added, like absenteeism or, behavioral stuff, tardiness, I don't know.
Look at their
So just-
caseloads
it
very
would just be
easy.
Yeah, I think
curious
the
to
case, I don't
see.
have the caseload data, but I can certainly have that ready.
I just think it'd be powerful to
Sure.
have some data behind our advocating for those positions when we're talking to the finance committee and the town. So that was just a thought.
I have a quick one, similar to my question for Amy, and first I'll say it did not go unnoticed that you're also carrying additional money from the central office in here and still kept the increase very, very small. There's a couple other additional positions where I see ads. One is in health service, and then the other one, also in special education, another para. Can you just talk a little bit about those additions?
Sure. So the health services one was the one I was talking about, how I was pulling my hair out because I realized yesterday, very late, that there was this, oh, what is this? Why is this here? Yeah, it was because we couldn't, the year before, we thought the student was going to be outplaced, and we didn't want to double count an outplacement plus a position for a one-to-one for
Okay,
that.
got it. I didn't know that. Thank you.
And then the other one for special education is we have 27 incoming eighth graders, but only 15 outgoing seniors on IEPs. So we have a net gain of 12 students in IEPs, so we need to hire a paraprofessional. So I noticed too in the special education today when I was looking at it again, I think, is it say 85,000? There's a line for professional salaries. We have a teacher who's taking a sabbatical. So you'll see there's no increase in FTEs, but you see an increase in salaries, which kind of is strange, because you wouldn't think like enough step and lane changes would happen to cause $85,000 of a change. And that's correct, because we have a teacher going on a sabbatical. So if you look at the contract, half that teacher's salary is paid, but then they're obligated to come back, and I don't remember how many years it is. Is it three years, something like that? Well, they have to continue with us in order to kind of repay us for allowing them to take that sabbatical. So we have to hire someone to replace that person, but it's a net gain of 0 for FTEs.
So yeah, the additional cost, yeah,
Right.
got it. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
I just have a general question about ELL, and I don't know if I don't really expect this to be answered tonight, and I don't even know if it's for you. I guess it's just sort of a broader question, maybe for Tracy. How many, I think I know, we have 4 ELL teachers across the district, or
In the district?
5? Okay.
Go ahead and ask your questions.
And then how
I
many
can-
students do we have across the building?
Yep,
at
so
each building?
I can answer that.
Okay.
So just in raw numbers, we have 10 at the high school, 7 at the middle school, 14 at Doyon, and 19 at Winthrop currently. Now, with that, the numbers themselves don't necessarily tell us a whole lot because it depends on the level of their language acquisition and the guidelines that are provided by the state in terms of how many hours of service those students receive. So as they become more proficient with the English language, they require less services. But initially, newcomers, as they're called, require a significant amount of service delivery. And we have the newcomers coming in at all levels. So it's not just, they're not all coming in at the elementary school, and by the time they reach the middle or the high school, they're proficient. We've got quite a few newcomers at the middle and high school level that are requiring a lot of services.
I'd also add too that at the middle school and high school level, I think I quoted it I used the same quote before, but it was Dr. Catherine Snow from Harvard when she talked about language acquisition and reading, learning how to read. When you're teaching younger people how to read, it's like turning a rowboat. But when you're teaching older kids, adolescents, how to read, it's like turning a steamship, like a ocean liner. So that's why the ratio at the high school level is, it's a 10-to-1 ratio roughly versus, a 19-to-1 ratio at elementary. Because it's that much harder to teach kids who are that much older, how to read.
Do we have a sense if those numbers are still increasing or plateauing?
They have been.
Still increasing.
No, they have been increasing.
Thank you.
And Brian, did you say 14 at Doyon, 19 at Winthrop? How many at the middle and high?
7 at the middle currently and 10 at the high school.
I just had a question for Tom in the high school budget, page 68.
Yep.
So all those right-hand columns say athletic revolving, but only the ones that are filled in the blue column are actually funded by athletic revolving. Does that make sense? So like,
In the far right, or in the blue column
so the
under
blue
appropriated?
columns there are, let's see, let me look at an example. The tennis coach,
Yep.
that is not funded by athletic revolving.
So, okay, that's a great question. I think this is maybe where you're going. So the appropriated budget contractually funds all of the head coaches. And the revolving account funds any other coaching staff.
Right.
So you see there's, some sports will have both.
We'll have both. Okay.
And obviously the assistant coaches or whatever the support staff may be, obviously are getting a different rate.
Yep.
Different rate of pay.
Okay.
I was curious about in the English department, the professional salaries, there's 7 FTEs, but the total salary is decreasing by 18,000. Why is it going down when the number?
So we had a retirement last year of a teacher who was kind of very experienced and up on the top of the pay scale, and it's been replaced by a teacher who's newer and therefore lower than.
Okay, so
Yeah, that happens sometimes. Other questions for high school? Any other questions for IT?
There was
Wagner?
Yeah, I'm waiting for Tracy.
lingering, yep,
Yeah.
there's a lingering question for Tracy. Go ahead, Trace.
Okay.
Dr. Wagner.
Yeah, Dr. Tracy Wagner.
Very much. Appreciate it.
I don't know if it's a question or more of an explanation. I was thinking about how to phrase this, but maybe kind of a day in the life. How do you meet with all the schools? You oversee, teaching and learning over, from pre-K to to 12. So how do you implement your role? And meet with the principals and make it all happen?
That's a
Roller skates.
There you go.
roller skates, pretty much. It's a great question. Could talk for a long time about it. I guess I'll begin by saying in most districts, most districts, it often looks like there's a school-based person for each content area. So like an ELA lead and a math lead. And then there's usually a district person who's the ELA department head or the math department head. And then there's often, some districts around us have an elementary director of teaching and learning and a secondary director of teaching and learning. And almost every district has an assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction or teaching and learning. Ipswich doesn't have that. Ipswich has my role. So I go to job-alike meetings with all those people and nod and say, yep, do that and help people with that and that and that. So it's a long way of saying I learned in my role that systems are really important. And so different systems are in place and I oversee the systems. And the nice part about that is that Ipswich has a lot of teacher leadership. There's a lot of opportunities for principals to be involved in curriculum. And my role becomes very much, and this isn't very glamorous, but a teacher once told me my role was like being the meniscus. I'm like the bend. I go to Brian, I go to the principals, I go to the teachers. I'm the role that is kind of the knower and the bender of all the things. So my days are meeting with principals, like the elementary principal said. I've been so happy to work with them so much more this year because the assistant principals are feet on the ground, putting out fires, not literally at all, but making sure the school is running smoothly so that the principals and I can meet together cross-district and do big initiatives like the dyslexia mandate. I'm so proud of the ELA curriculum review, checking in with math, common assessments, the standards-based report cards. Long way of saying. So I either am meeting with principals most every day or assistant principals, or I'm in communication with them, email, text, phone call, sometimes hourly, sorry everyone, but I'm always in communication with them. I meet with with Amy Gregory, who is the digital learning specialist every day. I'm in constant communication with her about digital learning and tools. I bother Keith Borgen, Director of Technology, all the time. And so I'm the one who's connecting. I'm connecting with Dr. Blake, also standing in his doorway, saying this, that, and the other thing. So I'm on roller skates a bit. But the nice part is that there's a high level of teacher leadership in Ipswich, and so an example of that would be with Compass. So Compass, for those of you who are new, is the teacher leadership stipended role, so it's beyond usual work hours and expectations for curriculum review. So one thing that I brought collaboratively to Ipswich is a curriculum review cycle. So I always call it the waterfall charts, the one I've shown it before with like ELA, ELA, ELE, ELA, as it moves through the years. And it's a cycle, a 5-year cycle, and we're on year 6. So that is to say different content are at the top of the curriculum review cycle, and that's the basket we put all the eggs in. And so this year it's science, and this year it's ELA. So we have a big Compass teams with teachers from the schools who meet together regularly to do curriculum review. And there's a process that we've developed and that I oversee over the years to unpack the standards, to do a gap analysis of our current curriculum. What do we have? What are we missing? To look at student work and student assessments to see, is it working? Is it not? To make recommendations for writing new curriculum or for vetting new curriculum, for implementing it, for assessing it. And that content area moves through the cycle. And there's teacher leadership involved throughout the process, and I oversee the leadership, and I'm in communication with principals, assistant principals, and our technology folks about the implementation of it. So I do all that. And my role also is grant writing. There's very little of the budget for teaching and learning that's in the appropriated budget. It is mainly the stipends for summer professional development and for roles like Compass, so the teacher leadership. The rest is grants. So a lot of my role and some of my day is grant management, essentially working with Tom and working with Dr. Blake, writing the grants, keeping my eye on them, figuring out the money, that piece. And then the other big part of my role is professional development, especially as things move down through the curriculum review cycle. So it's working with principals, texting them, bothering them. Does February 28th work for this team to go to PD? Setting it up, working with the consultants, getting the financial piece around it, and the summer. Ipswich is amazing for having, and it's just really notable how many teachers participate in summer PD here. Usually well over 100 teachers are coming to do curriculum development, so my role in the summer is really amplified. So it's a lot. I keep a meticulous Google Calendar where I chart everything. I set up all my meetings and I chart the time out, usually a week in advance, so I make sure that I'm meeting all the goals.
And of those grants, is there a portion of them that are outside of paying grant, FEFI? Okay.
So I oversee Title IIA, which is a federal grant for professional development. I oversee Title IV, which is kind of a catch-all. It's student support. So it can be PD, it can be social emotional learning. So together, those are about 40,000 that I oversee. I help out with Title I in just being a liaison and helping problem solve and keep my eye on it when needed. I've written all sorts of other DESE grants. So for example, one year we had a big computer science grant for professional development for teachers. I'm in regular contact with DESE about other grants that are available. I'm really hoping one comes along for elementary ELA, but I don't know if it'll be in time for our needs. And then the pain grant support and TWIG.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome.
That was exhausting just to hear. I'm like, oh my gosh.
It's a lot. It works, but it's a lot. That's true.
Any other questions? All right, well, I want to thank you all again for your input, explanations. I guess may I dismiss you? I guess you're good to go. Thank you very much, appreciate it. Great job.
Good night, thank you.
Thanks.
Tomorrow.
I think we had a lot more questions than last night, because I think we've all had we've had
Yeah, no, this is
more
great. This
hours
is
to
great.
go, so it's good. Yeah, and we need to understand it.
Yep.
We're gonna,
So there was some other questions that had been asked, so I wanted to provide answers to them. So one was for a list of open positions which have not been filled for this year. So we currently have the world language teacher position that's open. We have one custodian here, a custodial position at the high school that we have not been able to fill. And then the community liaison position is in the budget, but we did not fill it this year. The person left, and we did not fill it, so that's not in the budget for next year. We pulled that out. So those are the only three that we're aware of.
Are you going to provide us that, not just verbally, but are we going to see that?
And send an email, sure.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah. It was asked last night, so I just want to make sure I provided it. The other, so the second question was a list of proposed eliminated positions. So looking through, again, I can provide the list, but I'll just read it off. So we had the one FTE, the HR position. And this is, these are both at central, I have three at central office. So the 1.0 HR position, the .2 front desk secretary / Tracy's administrative assistant. And then our retirement benefits coordinator dropped .1. And then other positions, we have the 1.0 K1 teacher that we talked about last night, and then the world language FTE. And then the district-wide liaison, again, is also a position that we're eliminating from next year's budget.
It's a district-wide liaison.
So we had, 2 years ago, we had a ESSER-funded position. It was it was designed as a district-wide liaison position, and it was essentially a social worker to work with some of our most needy families in terms of helping them with community resources, reaching out to, help them with, whatever the needs were in the community, setting them up with mental health services, counseling services, food stamps, things like that. It was a part-time position. We brought it into the budget last year. The person ended up leaving I'm not even sure, I think she finished the year out with us, but resigned, and then we didn't fill the position.
And has that worked okay without that
Oh, yeah,
position? Okay.
yep,
It
yep.
hasn't been a historic position.
No,
It's
no,
sort
no,
of a COVID
no,
position,
it was like, yeah,
couple years
yep.
or years.
Yep.
In FY '22, it was funded through ESSA funds and was brought into the FY '23 budget.
See what else I
Anything
had
else
here.
come in over email that I emailed you?
A couple of smaller miscellaneous ones.
Okay.
Maybe, I know it's noted, but I couldn't see the amount, the snowplow that we're taking over from the town. What's the total amount for that?
It will be 30,000. And since this will be the first year of us, doing that, that 30,000 was the figure given to us by the town manager. I didn't have a clean way, so I just added 10,000 to each school. So, I think after a year, we'll get a sense of, obviously, the Winthrop School campus is smaller than the middle high school, so I probably could have done square footage or something, but we didn't have, that wasn't, I thought, a practical exercise, so.
Do we have a contract that we're inheriting as well, or do you have the opportunity
So,
to?
no, the town will continue to manage the contract, because it's a multi-year contract. The town is asking us to assume the cost, so we will pay against the existing contract for the work that's currently being done under that contract.
Once that expires, do we have opportunity to?
Well,
Look
I
at that.
honestly don't know.
There's always sensitive of money that's like not showing up in the classroom and where we have opportunity
Yeah.
there. That's why I ask.
I mean, the contract would be managed by Chris Race in his, in his liaisoning with the DPW.
Okay.
So it's kind of certainly working on behalf of the four buildings, including the central office, which is obviously very small, so, but.
Okay.
Sasha, was your question about when it expires, when the contract expires, that we could get quotes from other companies? Is that what you were?
Yeah, just how do we, one, to understand what the amount was, but two, is there opportunity to bring that down and shift that money into a classroom someplace? Yeah. Yeah. But if we were under contract, that answered my question, yeah.
Why did we inherit that? Again, you may have talked about it yesterday. Did we talk about it yesterday? Probably at length.
I kind of, not, we
Probably
didn't talk
like the
about,
whole meeting,
not
right?
at length, yeah, for 3 hours we
No, you
talked
remember.
about this $30,000.
An hour of our conversation?
No, I did mention it, and it was on one of the slides, but certainly not in great length. So, no, it was It's an expectation that the town manager provided. When Brian and I met with the town manager 2 weeks ago or thereabouts, there were two things that he informed us that the town was expecting the school district to
Including our budgets.
increase in our budget for things that the town is presently supporting.
Right.
One of which was the snow plowing cost, and the other of which was an increase in the climate resiliency manager's rate of pay.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you.
I would like to follow up with the town manager, and I'm happy to do it, about the climate resiliency manager, because I was under the impression he was only working 18 hours a week, but based on the dollar
I honestly
amount,
don't have a sense of, and I
maybe he was
think-
working 18 hours a week for the town and some for us, but I can follow up, but I just want to.
And I don't mind, in my response to your email earlier today about, I don't have a good handle on his job description, his hours, his goals for work, and
What is
my
the,
interactions with him have been minimal. First of all, he only started, I believe, in November.
Yeah.
And my interaction was exclusively to the application for the EPA grant.
what's our share of the cost?
Well, we're paying 50% of his salary.
I think it's a third, it says a.
Well, it does say a third because that's the dollar value. This is,
Okay. Gotcha.
that's the
That
dollar,
looks
that's the dollar value, not his time. So I'm not, I don't honestly know what his weekly schedule is, or I don't know, I don't know the job description. The position doesn't report to Dr. Blake. The
Right.
position's not under
Yeah,
our
it's not under
wheelhouse at
us,
all.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I did reach out to the town manager this afternoon, but I don't, he usually responds to my emails right away, so he may not have been in the office when I emailed him to get that information.
And I do work with him on Climate Resiliency Committee, and a large part of what he does, or what he's doing currently, is working on, looking at all of the municipal buildings, including the schools, and working towards, electrification and things to save us money in the long run through rebates and grants and things. So, I do think we will see benefits from his work in our buildings over time.
You know if grants are part of that, similar to what Tracy talked about, part of her role? Do you know that's something that he's looking into that directly?
Oh, he would,
Benefit us
He would do
he's
those,
facilitating
yeah.
himself,
That's what I mean.
yeah.
That's part of it.
It
Okay.
not overlapped with Tracy, no.
No, I was just saying, as similar to what Tracy's doing, bringing in
Yes.
federal
Yeah.
state grants, he's doing something similar. Okay.
Yeah.
I do think that's going to be a significant part of his work. I think each of the initiatives that seem to be part of the mission of the town within the environmental, conservation area are going to be driven by the cost of being able to provide those services, which I'm thinking is expected that he's going to help bring in some of those resources from outside as opposed to adding them onto the tax base.
Yeah, and Chris Race was on the last call at Climate Resiliency, and he, I think the two buildings they're really looking to push towards electrification and sort of invest in our town hall and the middle school, high school, because they're,
Biggest
they're
buildings.
not going anywhere.
Right.
And they're, big user of energy, so.
One of the increases that's really across the board, that's a significant percent increase, is on materials. Well, the dollars tend to be small, someplace between, 1,000, 5,000, 6,000, but some of them are going up 50%. Is that an increase in volume? Is that an increase in individual cost there?
Materials?
Just in general, materials are showing up across all the different schools, yeah.
That could be your consumables, if it's in classroom materials, and
Yeah.
those costs have gone up significantly for any paper products, et cetera.
I did
to that
kind of
degree?
peek
If
through
that's what you're
after,
looking at.
after
I'm
I
just,
saw
like,
that.
most of them are 50% increases, that's why.
Yeah.
I'm surprised at that amount, that's what stood out
I
to
wonder
me.
if some of those cover things like iReady and,
There's a
Right,
significant,
illustrative math.
so again, getting back
Technology.
to ESSER funds, right, which was both a blessing and a curse in the last 5 years, right? We were able to bring in a huge volume of resources to the district that weren't presently, at the time, available, and now we're kind of like, continue to need them. So a good chunk of the ESSER funds, somewhere in the area of easily about $120,000 were for the purchase of goods and materials, supplies for classrooms, certainly lots of technology, a lot of subscriptions for the, portals for web content. Subscriptions was big
And for these
across the district. So-
Excuse me, sorry.
So that's also going to appear. One of the things that we did work with the principals on, and Keith, and he could explain this in far greater detail, but one of the things that we did probably in November is went, literally ESSER expense by ESSER expense, and decided that what needed to be brought forward, what were teachers still using, what were kids still needing. A lot of the ESSER-funded materials and the online subscriptions and, annual renewals and things were really not necessarily needed any longer, but some have become incredibly useful that are still, a great value. Even in pushing a lot of iPads and a lot of, technology and remote learning, that's still a clear advantage to many kids.
Okay, thank you.
It seems like a lot of these assessments that are done throughout the year that require subscriptions
Yep.
seem to be, more expensive than pens and paper, but necessary.
Right. And some other things, like, at one point, we were flooded with Zoom account subscriptions, because we needed them, right? Every teacher had their own account. Now, we don't use them, so we're able to get rid of many of those, and those were ESSER funded as well. So they wouldn't appear in a budget, but certainly it's a reduction. We kept them for the administrators and school committee, et cetera.
Question about FEFI's funds. How many, and if there's which positions that had previously been covered by FEFI's grants have been rolled into the budget in recent years? Recent years.
So if
Sorry, paying grants, yeah.
offhand, three that come to mind right away. The two world language positions were initially FEFI funded and then rolled into the budget. And the computer science position we currently have was a FEFI funded position.
There may be more.
I think that's it.
There may be more, we could look back, but.
Okay.
Diana, do you mean positions that are brought into the FY25 budget, or just in recent years? Or
Either or,
Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't seem there was a
there
change
aren't
this
any,
year.
there aren't
Okay.
any FEFI's funded positions now being brought forward
Okay,
into '25. But as Dr. Blake said, there have been over the course of the last handful of years.
okay. And then, this is kind of related, just, I know we're getting, we're bolstering the ELA program. It was a FEFI's position, a paying grant position for the reading coach.
Yep.
That is not in the budget.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's a good question. So Tracy and I actually talked about that today, because I think, Sasha, you may have asked that question last night, or no, Jeff asked the question last night. If there were other positions that were FEFI funded that we were thinking about writing FEFI grants for, that should be in the budget. And that reading position really should be in the budget, and we didn't put it in. I don't think we thought about that when we put this together.
There's opportunity for the paying grant cycle, potentially.
There is, or we could add it. You could tell me to add it.
Could I add something to that?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going
This
to
is
say.
my proposed budget. If you want me to add something back in, we can add it in. If you want to tell me to cut it out, we can cut things out too. This is your deliberation, and it becomes your budget. I mean, that's why we're having these conversations, and so,
Refresh my memory, that was in last year's.
it was, but it was underfunded, and we couldn't hire anybody.
Right. That's what I was going to add.
It was underfunded.
Yes.
Okay.
How, or what?
Well, I think,
couldn't hire
I don't,
someone
know.
for the
Yeah, we,
amount we
correct,
approved.
yep.
Correct. We had several applicants, some of whom really, we were prepared to hire. But at the end of the day, so to speak, they really could not accept the work. There were two issues. One is that it didn't have a sufficient amount of pay for them to leave what they're doing. And candidly, which we can all appreciate, with a guarantee for a job for only 1 year, right? It's not in the budget, and FEFI said, we're going to approve it, but for 1 year. People didn't want to leave their employment for either underpaid or no guarantee of year 2. Just to be honest about that, that's
Yeah,
what I wanted to
yeah.
add to that,
Yep.
so.
Yep.
How much was it? How much were we offering?
68,000 or thereabouts?
68,000, and then there were, the actual dollar amount was a little bit higher, but you needed to account for benefits, et cetera.
And really, people that we were interviewing, and I wasn't involved in the interviews, but I was on sort of the tail end of the conversations, but people that were being interviewed that were finalists were giving us feedback that they were making 85 or 90,000 at their existing district.
And we were looking for one person to split it over 2 buildings?
Yes. Yep. Although that's not uncommon in other districts, to have one person that does sort of dual duty. But our salary was not competitive, and there was no guarantee of a second year of employment.
Were it competitive, but with only the 1 year, do you think that still would have been a deal breaker? I mean, that's a what if, but that's would be a FEFI question once again for
Yep.
us to ponder.
I
but-
think potentially it would be a deal breaker for, in particular, somebody from the outside coming into the system. But if somebody, if somebody within the Ipswich Public Schools wanted to take on that role for a year with a guarantee of sorts that they would be able to go back into their previous position, which has its own, implications there, that would be, I think, the only possibility.
Sorry. Who decides, because there's many successful FEFI's grants, but who ultimately decides on, is it us, which positions we want to roll into, which programs we want to roll into the budget? Out of how many Payne grants, about how many do we?
Well, there aren't all that many positions. As I said to Diana, there's only been a few positions that we've
Brought into our budget.
we've brought into the budget, and it's a collective decision amongst the leadership team whether they want to build it into their budget. Is it a successful program or not?
Should we transition to,
Yep, let me just make sure that I answered the questions that were sent in. So we're going to get more information yet on the climate resiliency manager position. And we talked about the multilingual learner numbers by school. Had information on special education if they came up.
I had that as a question, but Bev wasn't here, so I didn't ask.
Well, go ahead and ask, and I'll see if I have it on my,
Well, similar to the
my cheat sheet
English
here that she
language
gave me.
learners, I guess. We're similar sorts of questions, so
Yeah.
how many students? And I guess, I don't know if it matters, IEPs versus 504s. And then sort of percentages of what we're doing in-house versus out-of-district. And then, is that trend increasing or decreasing? And I suspect it's increasing.
Yep. So I can answer some of that. We have a total of 378 special education students. About 23% of our population. It's a little bit higher than the state average of 20%. I can give you a by-school breakdown if you need it, if it matters. We have 24 students in out-of-district placements, so 6% of the special education students are out of district.
I'll take the school breakdown.
I'm sorry?
I'll take the school
Okay.
breakdown.
Winthrop has 86. Doyon has 90. Middle school, 108. And high school, 94.
Equal.
And-
Distributed.
Is special ed, what is the baseline, a 504?
So 504 is simply accommodations. It's not special education.
Right, so it's not, but IEP.
IEP is
Yeah,
is
starts at IEP.
special education. Yep. And I don't have the 504 numbers here.
Other ones, or you think?
No, I think that's enough, yeah. Okay?
I have one more maybe detailed question. On page 42, towards the bottom in the principal's office, account 6111,
I'm sorry, what page?
42 in the budget book. I'm going to be intentional on how I ask this one. Principal's office, account 6111. Almost 11% increase, which is significantly different than last year.
Yep.
Is that a placeholder to be in line with?
It is not, and I was going to volunteer the answer, because the type of question has come up now, this, I think, to be the fourth time this evening, and that's a very similar question. So what you see in blue is as the budget opened at the beginning of the fiscal year, right? That's what we brought forward a year ago, that's what the school committee approved, that's what town meeting funded. Throughout the course of the year and throughout the course of the hiring process, if we anticipated hiring a teacher at step 9, but we had to hire a teacher at step 11, you're going to see at that point the step 9 salary.
Okay.
And in the case that, in both principals, assistant principals' cases at both elementary schools.
I think they were new hires, yeah, that makes sense.
Correct.
Okay.
So we really underfunded those positions last year. So what you're seeing in last year's budget, the jump isn't necessarily a big raise.
Yeah.
It's to accommodate for what we actually had to provide as a competitive rate of pay.
Perfect, thank you, Tom.
That's a very good
So that- yeah.
explanation.
Yep.
So that exists in a couple of places. And
That
you had
will come
asked that
up
question
and
tonight,
get-
and I was
Yeah,
going to
that's
hop
sort of
in.
what I'm-
Caught, by,
And,
not
yeah.
caught, but
Yeah,
noticed.
some of this is informational, some of it is getting ahead of these things.
Right.
Some of these numbers stand out.
Yeah.
We're
Oh,
going to
yeah.
get questions about, so I want to make sure
Sure.
We need to
we all,
understand it.
in general, understand it and prepared for that, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Other budget questions? I know one other question came up last night, and I don't know how much we can project all of the revolving fund balances at the end of the year, but certainly those are reported out to the school committee every month, so you have them in your December folder. Is it the second?
Would be the January folder, actually, but it's the end of the prior month.
Right, right. So in your January folder, we have them as of December 31st, so you can see what the balances were at that point in time.
Now, I have projected all balances through the end of the year for the purpose of this exercise, and I can certainly share that out. But that, of course, is a projection, right? There are going to be lots of variables that may be unknowns special in special education, but really across those things. Some of them are going to be easier to predict, like the athletic revolving fund is fairly easy to predict.
Right.
It's a little stable, but there are some that will be a bit of a moving target. But certainly, if you'd like to see the sort of what's in the background of what some of these balances are expected to be in 6 months from now, I can certainly share that
I
out.
mean, I think for me, it was just the ones that we are substantially dipping into for offsets. Those projections of those few in particular might be nice just to see.
So the good news about both of those, just to continue the theme, right, particularly school choice and the school lunch revolving fund,
Yeah.
those have had and still have some fairly healthy balances. We have not been overly reliant on those. School lunch in particular, we haven't done anything other than pay the cost of food and pay the cost of the lunch workers.
Yep.
And now with the universal lunch program, I think it's really a good opportunity for us to be able to use that fund in a different way, but for things that have to be germane to the ability to provide, food services. With the committee agreeing to roll forward for some school choice positions next year, hopefully we'll continue to receive some students that come in those areas. And if we keep a number around where we are now, we have 59 students, if we keep that sort of number in play across the district, then I think it's more than fair to say that will be a balance that we'll be able to rely on. If our school choice population continues or drops, then that's going to be, that's going to be an unknown. But as I shared when the question sort of around this came up last night, we have about $1.7 million in school choice now. If we buy the curriculum, bringing that down by, $212,000 thereabouts, and the additional reliance for health, for health insurance. My prediction is that with those, the end of the following year, because those are FY25 expenses, there should be a net balance about $1.4 million to $1.5 million.
Okay.
So it would still be healthy. And I think a real advantage to using funds like that for the purchase of the ELA curriculum is it's a one-time cost, right? And if we were to bring $212,000 into the FY25 budget to buy the curriculum, we would then be just turning around and lowering the FY26 budget by $212,000 because we don't need to carry that amount. So the use of revolving funds for really, crisp one-time purchases I will recommend that all day long.
However, I don't know how we can not decline in our choice students, given what we voted on last month, in that for years, and we vote on choice every year, but for years, the middle and high school took choice as well. And these past 2 years, I think, we've had the principals recommend that they are closing choice or don't want to open any choice students. So the only choice spots we have are in elementary. So if just by definition over time, we have 1.7 million, that's in a history of opening choice positions at every school. And even when you open them, you don't get what you open. So if we have 4 or 5 available each at Winthrop and Doyon and nowhere else, and we only get 2 each, in comparison to years past when we had choice positions open in all 4 schools and maybe got a few, I don't know how we cannot decline.
Well, I mean, if we decide to continue what we did this year, every year for the next 6 or 7 years, but, that's why we have the opportunity to do it every year. So I think it is something we should keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Because we already have all the existing choice students matriculating through, and we're getting paid every
I
year
think
for
that
them.
there's an important, footnote there, and I don't want to appear as an advocate. That's not my role. But I think there's a footnote there that, once we enroll a school choice student in the grade, he or she we're committing for their career. So it's not like school choice goes away in the middle and the high school. I think, and Dr. Blake, correct me if I'm off, but I think the concern that the two secondary principals were raising is to bring a student in as school choice as a 10th grader. It brings a lot of, potentially, complications for placing that student in the right place, in the right environment. Whereas if we enroll the student in, say, the 3rd grade, or never mind kindergarten, we're going to have that student for his or her career. So the middle school and high school aren't getting out of the choice serving business. They're sort of getting out of the enrollment business.
So if they decided in the future to open choice at the high school, could they open it just in the 9th grade?
They could,
They
sure.
can, sure.
Yep, each grade opens however many seats.
Individually.
It
mean,
is,
in the
it
past,
is
they've
driven
given
by a
us a number, but-
determination of where the school administration believes there are appropriate openings, right? We should only, following the prescription, is only be enrolling school choice youngsters into a place where there are, there's availability, there's room, there's space.
Yeah. Okay. It's a moment in time, but I'm worried about future.
Sure,
Of that account.
understandable, yeah.
Because we need it. We potentially have to fund feasibility studies.
Okay, let's move on to capital or
Capital?
budget.
How about,
calculator, or
how about,
whatever
how
you
about
think.
capital? We do-
Capital.
There were three sets. There were 3 pages and 3 sets, one for each of you.
Oh.
Is that, yeah, there were three pages. Might be easier for me to just walk around, sorry. This came to us at in a pretty small format. So when Brian and I were talking about it this morning. How about if we put it on something?
Magnifying glasses to get there?
On something that may actually, And I'm a big fan of 11/17 size paper. So that's,
My VCD. Because I don't. Still small.
One for me or no? You need one, or you don't have one for yourself then? What do you do?
Is there an extra one?
Oh, I got this.
You need this back, Tom? I can look over.
Here, here. Nope.
Yeah, I'll just take Laura's for now. I thought I made enough. My bad.
Okay. All right. So first of all, this is a draft, has not been approved by the select board or town manager or anybody. This is conversations with department heads, school folks, administrators, and then this is sort of what's been put together to date. Although it's not in color, the shaded areas are potentially different funding sources. So for our purposes tonight, we're going to look at the FY '25 column. The top of the first page is town things. About 3/4 down the page starts the school pages. So for next year, we are looking at upgrades to the fire alarm and security system at the central office. The boiler in central office also needs to be replaced. So that's a total of $27,000 there. Moving down to the Paul F. Doyle Memorial School for next year, there's $55,000 that's earmarked, and that's part of, and you can see if you slide all the way across to the far right, that's part of the ESCO project and funding that we're looking at. It's not finalized, but that's what we're looking at to do there. It's interior LED lighting upgrades.
So hopefully we wouldn't have to pay for that, that's what you're saying?
Be capital. And then over on the next page, so that's essentially it for funding there. But what I can tell you is that we have funding currently, we didn't have enough to do both buildings, to rekey both elementary schools, part of our security measures. So we have funding for one, and then you'll see in Winthrop, about halfway down, the rekey entire school. It's extremely expensive to rekey the building, so we have money currently available, and then this would be the balance to finish, to do both schools. But again, I'm going to go back up a little bit. So in the Winthrop School, we also have the LED lighting upgrade as part of the ESCO project. The emergency and exit lights, $12,000 there. The parking lots over at Winthrop are a mess. So we're looking to have those redone, milled and overlaid. It's $155,000. I talked about the rekeying of the building. And those costs are for interior, all the interior doors. And then the White House ramp. So as you know, we have the White House outside the end of the Winthrop School. That ramp needs to be brought up to code and repaired. So that's what those costs are.
Why do we need to have it rekeyed? Is that just something that's done
Because,
every?
yeah, well, it's not, it's more involved than that. It's the door handles themselves and the locking mechanisms that are all being replaced because they don't
Is it
all
security?
work. Yeah, it's
Or,
part of our security measures.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Then we move on to the middle and high school. We're looking at interior painting, which is something that we do every year. We have a, sort of a cycle that we go through. Again, the emergency and exit light combination LED replacements, backflow preventer replacements, kitchen equipment. We're looking to upgrade some of the kitchen equipment there over the next number of years. And then the wheelchair lift valve and pump replacement. That's the quote-unquote elevator at the stadium going up to the press box that we've had all sorts of issues with. So we're going to be replacing that. And then district-wide, we have technology user equipment there, and that's part of the IT department. Electric charging stations, we started that project 3 years ago, Jimmy? 2 years ago?
I don't know personally, but
Yeah, okay. So we have the charging station out behind the high school, on the high school side, up along the fence. When we ran the electric from the pole into the conduit to the one unit that has two plugs attached to it. And then but when we did that, we poured another pad and ran the conduit for another set of charging stations. So that's what this is, to move that project forward. Chris puts in, just for district-wide, wherever it's needed, the flooring and carpet, roofing repairs, interior and exterior painting, and I don't like the wording of this, I'm not even going to say it out loud, but we're looking at safety film, safety measures. So, and if you're aware, that's a pricey endeavor to do the first floor windows. So that's pretty much what's outlined for next year, and then you can see the list of projects that are currently on the list. It is somewhat fluid in that every year we have the conversation about what, what should remain on or what should come off. And we've had things that we've been able to fund through other sources, other available funds because we needed to earlier. And so we've been able to pull them off of here. So this gets reinvented, if you will, every year.
Those numbers in district-wide for flooring, carpet, roofing, and interior are not for specific projects. They're just
Right.
like a fund in case
Right.
they need to paint something or
Yep.
fix something throughout the year.
Yep.
And it certainly supports the appropriated budget on things that are really unknowns right now.
Right.
So there's availability to hire a contractor if there's some emergency comes up, or there's always going to be an available balance to attest for that. In some years, they may not, these capital funds may not get used, or some years may need more. It's a reliable placeholder.
Yeah. How does Green Communities money fit in here? Is that the shading that we can't see?
It may be the shading that we can't see. That's certainly how we've funded a number of projects over the last couple of years. I don't know the status of the current grant.
I don't see much. Actually, I don't see much shaded for FY '25. Sometimes, well, there's some stuff.
They-
So
Yep.
There's some.
So what's not included in here is the big Noresco project that's being considered. And so that may be where, they may be waiting for the recommendation to come back on that
Yeah, they're
and then
back,
apply for
yeah.
green.
They're back.
Green
I just don't know
communities.
what they've,
Yeah.
if they've decided what to do yet, but. And this is funded out of,
Free cash. Yep.
it's not our
Right.
budget.
Right. It is separately budgeted and separately appropriated at town meeting. I think it's important to note, I think Brian already did, but this is a draft. This isn't final. It's not been, certainly when the town manager shared this with us, he knows that we were obviously going to answer questions tonight. But it's important to note that this is not a done deal by any stretch.
Yep.
But they've received all the input from the schools as far as what we consider to be priorities.
And are we still pulling recommendations for the schools from the 2019 Dude Solutions report? Or is it, were we sort
We
of
are.
exhausted that?
No.
We're still
No, I
using
believe
that?
we are.
And how often does that get done? If it's 5 years old?
That I can't answer. Well, it's a facilities function. I don't know. I could ask Chris.
So it's a combination of that and then department head, or, Chris weighing in on what he thinks.
Yep.
So we don't get much say in this, or we?
I think the town would
Yeah.
expect that you're
Yeah.
aware of it and you support it. I think if you're opposed to it, then obviously we need to react to that.
Or if there's other things that you want on here, we can look at it or bump it up sooner, look to bump it up sooner if it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, this is projected out 5 years, so there's some wiggle room in it, historically, for the elementary schools, we're trying to delay non-essential things. Putting a bit more money in this building. Any general questions? I mean, we can always put this on our agenda for next week if people want to spend some more time with it, but got it.
So Chris does meet with the principals in the fall at some point, and he did get a pretty good list of recommendations from each of the buildings about what to, what some of the needs are, facility needs, classroom needs, bathroom work, any of those type of things. And I made reference to some of the work that we want to be able to add into upgrades to kitchens and kitchen equipment. You see some of that reflected here as well.
Yeah, I saw that.
I referenced that last night.
No, I would anticipate you might get pushback on a boiler for central office, because there's a big push to electrify and get away from fossil fuel. So I'm just guessing someone's gonna, boilers are.
So these, as you know, these reflect recommendations from the school district. We don't really have any more authority over it, right? It's going to be funded by, or recommended by the capital planning committee, and then the select board, and then FinCom, and so it goes through its own sort of independent process, similar to every budget.
I know one of the reasons the FinCom wanted a third night with us is they wanted to talk about capital, but I don't know how much.
Well, we'll be ready.
Yep.
Any questions on this for right now? Thank you for getting us a draft. It's good to, in the works.
We'll do the calculator now?
Sure.
All right.
Got a lot of homework, Jimmy. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I got two.
Oh, great.
Okay, thanks.
Bye, Jimmy.
Jimmy?
As I'm walking around, I thought having a handout might be more useful than putting it on the screen.
Yes.
As I was noticing sitting here last night, some of the, one thing if we're looking at a slide, right? There's another thing if we're looking at something with lots of numbers. So I figured this might be a little more useful than.
That was glasses on, glasses off, glasses off.
And then even if we looked at it on our laptops, it'd be a lot of sliding back and
Yes.
forth depending on the size. So I don't mean to be killing lots of trees. A good old-fashioned piece of paper is useful. Okay, so there's a memo that goes with this, but I thought what might be helpful is sort of to walk through the calculator, and as it's been sort of adjusted or added to, and sort of upgraded, a little bit from some of we had, two subcommittee meetings in the fall, and we talked about it, and these are some of the ads from those meetings. I then got confirmation of all of the historical figures from the town treasurer's office. So maybe if I could start looking at the calculator, sort of walk through that. The set of letters across the top represents, columns. The set of letters and numbers down the left side represent rows. Row, A, under assumptions, the first thing, which is in sort of the tan color, annual average increase in operating revenue from the town. The town has are projected, and the individuals that were the original authors of this have projected that each year, the operating revenue available to the school district will go up by about 3.2%. That's an assumption. It's actually higher this year, but nonetheless, that's an assumption. And we have to have a starting point, which I appreciate, right? We all do. So that's what the first column there that appears in in sort of the tan color. Row B that says annual average increase in the school operating budget. Now, that's an assumption also that the budget, that the school operating budget at a minimum will go up by 3.9%. And that appears in, and I also then color-coded years 25 to 30, also in the tan color and the green color, representing those, the representation between those figures. Row number 1, underneath projections, that is the appropriated operating revenue, as approved by town meeting from fiscal years 21, 22, 23, and 24. Those are actuals. So everything through FY '24 are actuals. 25 and forward are obviously a function of the prior year times 3.2%. The next line down, row 2, operating budget projected or actual. Also now fiscal 21, 22, 23, and 24 are actuals, confirmed by by Town Hall. And 25 forward, representing in green, is the prior year number times 3.9%. Row number 3, projected shortfall, the amount then that would be needed or requested from stabilization exists obviously as a negative figure. If we go right to fiscal '24, which is this year, you may recall that when we were, a year ago now, or last spring, certainly going into town meeting, we requested and received permission for $962,704 to come out of stabilization to fund the fiscal '24 budget. You see in column G, fiscal '25 in blue, a number that we presented to you last night as the shortfall, and it was, Jenny, was your question earlier tonight, right?
Yep.
For the projected shortfall for the fiscal '25 budget of $1,496,387. Row number 4, the annual contribution to stabilization is what are we taking out of the annual budget as we close the year to help keep the fund going into future years. In fiscal year '22, the contribution from the fiscal '22 budget was $1.3 million. Last year, as we closed the year, we contributed $2.7 million. Row 4 is also to be an actual, so there's nothing there moving forward. Row 5 is a number that we get a couple times during the year from the town treasurer, what the interest is, and that obviously stays with the fund. We don't obviously have any projections there, but so far this year, we've received $38,000 in interest. It may be more as the year closes, but that's that. So row 6, year-end actual stabilization net balance. These would be the projected net balances at the end of the year, without any further appropriation. So that's the balance that we're carrying as of right now. And if we were to do nothing in fiscal year '24 as we close, then that would be the balance for the stabilization fund, $3,906,198. Oh, yeah, sure.
In the FY '24 orange column, where it's empty to the right of the 2.7 million,
Yes?
when is that determined, the amount, when would,
So that's where I was just going.
The
You're a step
timing
ahead of me.
of-
That's number 7. That's row 7.
okay?
Annual contribution to the stabilization fund projected. Row 4 is the annual contribution that is actual. So there's been no decision about what the contribution would be yet, so it's not an actual contribution. but it appears down as part of a plan.
And at what
So
point in
row
the
4
process is that determined to be actual?
Right.
At the end of, so town meeting?
Well, town meeting ultimately, but you folks have the authority over how the school district spends its budget. The recommendation that we made as part of last night's budget and coming into tonight and for further conversation is that I would foresee our ability to contribute $900,000 in available funds as we close fiscal '24, to be able to bring more than the 300,000 assumption, but not quite, obviously, what we were able to do last year. Last year, we put in 2.7 million. But the budgets are getting, tighter. So that's what row 7 is. Row 7 is a projection. At this point, it's a recommendation from the administration as far as how we would close out the year. Row 8 would be what would be the year-end balance if everything else in the column sort of, reconciled. So if we put in $900,000 as we close fiscal '24, the balance on June 30th of fiscal '24 would be $4,806,198. So I hope that was useful just as a broad exercise about how this looks and feels. And I know that coming out of the budget subcommittee meetings in the fall, I know, Sasha had a couple conversations with some of the authors of the document, and I found that very helpful in helping me understand it and helping me work with Town Hall to get some of the figures tight and crisp and reconciled. So if we are able to do this for FY '24, and I put on my memo, because it goes hand in hand, going down to item number 5 on the memo. Items 1 through 4 I really just discussed already. But item number 5 is what the future may hold and what are some of the working assumptions moving forward. I have made no changes to the working assumptions that you presently have. I think I'd be getting ahead of the game, and I think that may be too optimistic or outside of outside of my wheelhouse, if you will. So item number 5 on the memo says we're going to hold to 300,000 per year, that the town growth stays at 3.2, which is already higher this year, which is a plus, and the school budget would increase at 3.9%. I think each of those things, just as an aside, I think each of those things are probably not accurate for working assumptions. But the calculator was based on that, and I don't want to get ahead of our conversations, together. So, but keeping those assumptions in place, the stabilization fund gets us to our 5-year commitment. If you go now to column I, my bad, column I, fiscal year '27, which is year 5, at the end of year 5, with these assumptions all in place, there is going to be a $220,000 balance in stabilization, which could either retain there or be used to at least supplement a little of fiscal '28. So that's why our comfort level in recommending what we did last night was pretty crisp.
The two other thoughts. One, we had the previous override. We have on line 4, column C. Could we historically go back and look further back as far as what the actual contributions to stabilization were?
Yeah, no, I have those right.
Town meetings, it would be in all those, right?
Yeah, I guess my point is that we're ultra, this document, this calculator, is sort of a, I don't know, guide, I don't know what to call it, but certainly the assumption has always been that we're going to be putting $300,000 away. Very clearly, at least the 2 years that we can see, we put in way more than that, 3 or 4 times more than that.
Right.
Right? So I would be curious to see what that historical piece is. Because I think that, and to your point, Tom, the assumption that we're only going to put $300,000 back in every year moving forward is,
I think that was always meant as a minimum,
Yes.
like a
Right,
number we're
but-
comfortable with.
yeah, yeah.
And I do think FY '22 and FY '23 largely reflect because we had such an influx of federal funds. So it allowed us to put,
Not,
I mean, I agree, we should go back.
Yeah.
It should go
Yeah,
back
not-
to FY
right.
'16. If the calculator was created
Right.
in '15,
Yeah.
we should be able to go back another 5 years.
Yeah, I could certainly do
don't
that.
forget,
I could
those
certainly
federal
produce
funds
it.
we were expending them. So we had positions and bodies and
Yeah, but we
materials and
weren't
supplies.
expending
We
them
were-
from appropriated funds from the town. We were expending them from money. Weren't we saving money from?
Isn't it part of that from the 2022 override as well? That's where some of those funds are coming from?
Because we didn't start
would be
using it until we passed in 2022, so FY 2023.
Into the stabilization.
Right.
fund. Isn't that what, part of the 2.7? That's the
Yes, would have
22
been-
override.
Sure.
Would have
Yeah.
included override.
Yeah, that's not,
money.
that's not
Yeah.
surplus.
Right, right, but that's why I want to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The-
yeah,
the-
I think it would get us.
The
a bit-
first year of the most recent override was last year, fiscal '23.
Yeah.
And the contribution from stabilization was, E3, 1,879,121. That's what was received to fund the fiscal '23 budget. And last year, FY '23 was the first year of the current override. Yeah.
I have a question about, what?
I started to yawn and
I have a question about line.
We're all yawning. That's why I'm chuckling. 'cause
Do
we're
I
all
do that?
yawning.
Is that what
oh,
I?
it's not you, Tom. It's just
Tom, talk about math some more. We'd love that.
I think our last agenda item about math.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure. At 9 o'clock at night, let's have a math conversation, right? Sorry, I don't mean to be, sorry.
One.
A little humor.
Row one?
Row one,
Row one, yes.
FY '23 is actual number, FY '24 is actual number.
Yes.
FY '25 is,
Projected.
Well, so for
solidly
row one,
projected.
no, FY '20, that's a terrific,
Revenues.
those are two terrific questions. So G1 and G2, let's do G1 first. G1 is the number that we received, it's in your budget book.
yes.
We got the
that's an actual
updated
number. I
from,
mean, it-
from Town Hall. So that's new, that's why I redated this yesterday. So G1 is the number that Town Hall has given us to plan on as our base budget for fiscal '25. So that number is real, 38,120,016.
So my question is, E1 to F1 is 5% on my calculator.
Okay?
So
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. The assumption,
that include, I mean, it includes crap 2.5,
New growth.
new growth.
new growth,
Chapter 70? I mean, does
Chapter
it-
70.
Okay, because that's, and then F1 to G1 is 4.1%.
So that was where I was going when I said earlier that
Higher.
3.2% is also pretty low.
Okay.
We've seen growth within the town and within the capacity to support the schools higher than
I mean, it's
3.2%.
growth, but isn't it also stuff we get in the fall?
I mean,
From,
like from Chapter 70?
Yeah, from
Yeah,
the
it
state.
would include that. Chapter 70,
that was a chunk of money.
122,000
That was
this
a
year.
lot.
Yes, yeah. Yep.
But we're still only carrying it forward at 3.2 for now.
For the purpose of this exercise, I didn't want to
Yeah,
go
that makes
changing
sense.
assumptions without a group conversation around that. But I do think it's more than fair, as the numbers represent, that 3.2% growth we're seeing higher growth than that.
Yeah, well, I think when if I recall, when the calculator was created, it was only Proposition 2.5 plus new growth was that number. So I recall it being 3.1, but if it's including more than that, I could see why it's higher. And that is
It
more
wouldn't-
accurate.
It wouldn't change the 3.2% unless those additional that would change the amount, but not the percentage change year over year. Unless those were increasing by significantly more than 3%.
Right, but I guess I'm saying it's adding more things than just those two things. It's adding additional appropriations we get in the fall.
Yeah, that line is total revenue. It's not just, that's
just
right.
those
It includes
things,
all
yeah.
those
And
things.
it is a representative of the town's anticipated total revenue growth for the year from all sources, not just property tax, but all sources. And as the sheet that's in your budget book represents, that the typical contribution to operating the schools is like 62% of the operating, of the anticipated revenue for the town from all sources.
I think it's, I appreciate the updates. I think it's appropriate that we talk about some of those assumptions that are in there, the 3.2 and your 5.1 and your 5.2 and your 5.3.
I agree.
It's hard for me even to think about, like, if we go back historically for the revenue piece, I understand why they put the 3.2 in. If you think about pandemic years and wild fluctuations there, it's hard for us to, it would be hard, I think, to recast that. I think what we could do safely, or what I might propose now, is at least for the next 3 years, which is we need to get the override through another 3 years to make it last a full 5, we could take the 4.1%, which is the increase from last year's revenue to this year, and hold that through, right, without going too much upward. I don't have any reason to say it should be higher or lower in FY '26 or '27, so that might be a safe, at least, starting point. We can adjust from there. I also think that 3.9%, the operating budget has grown more than that over the last several years. I think we could do the same thing and say this year's 5.08 number would be something we could carry through instead of the 3.9 for exactly the same reasons. Let's just assume the same thing going forward. If we come under, great. If we're a little higher, at least we're in some kind of a range. That would be my starting recommendation there. I don't know, or I'll pause there. I was going to ask if you have thoughts on 5.1, the contributions back each year. My understanding of that was sort of earmarked as like 1%, which is why it was around 300,000 what goes back into that.
So I did not realize that was an anticipated 1%.
I don't know if it's
did-
exactly,
that's
I
the
just
first
sort of
time I'm hearing that,
ballparked it
but
there. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was any other, or I'm not aware of any other calculus that went into
The
that
history
number.
lesson that I got on the calculator, I don't recall there being any magic to the 300,000.
Yeah.
I think it was just a safe, affordable number that wasn't ridiculously high to
Yeah.
make this, work arbitrarily, nor was it, unreasonably low to not make this work.
Yeah.
I think it was
Yeah,
just
and I
a
think
fair
conserv-
placeholder.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And I would say it's also conservative and probably appropriate that they were being conservative in it.
This also was a new thing in 2015, 2016. They didn't have,
Yeah.
they couldn't look back 5
Right.
years and 10 years.
Yeah,
And now we have essentially 10 years of experience with this to look back.
So if we use,
Use that and analyze that and see if we should switch any of these numbers going forward.
if we use those assumptions, the 4.1% revenue growth and the 5.08 budget increase year over year, in FY '27, we're underfunded by about 170,000. So we fall just shy of that full 5 years. Now, that 170,000, I will acknowledge, in the scheme of the dollar amounts that we're talking about, is not significant. So we're really close, which I think is great.
What if we
think
put
there's a
5
degree
instead
of-
5.08? Because, I mean, I think 3.9 with the way that fixed costs and everything is increasing and, I'm not, in my vast experience on the budget committee, I'm not seeing a future where we are going to be having budgets in the 3% anytime soon, just given the costs
Yeah, that's what-
that are beyond our control. So I think having a number like 5
Yeah.
might be more.
And especially going into a labor negotiating year,
Yeah, so
and labor and cost of labor are going to drive this train for the foreseeable future.
And even a 5% budget, there are some cuts in here. It's-
right, so if
it's
we,
not-
if we replace those
Oh,
assumptions, we fall about 170,000 short in year 5, FY '27, which is 170,000 falling short of making that override last a full 5 years. So I think that's a small amount considering the $40-ish million budgets that we're talking about, or revenue and budgets that we're talking about. However, we also need to, can't factor here, but just the sort of commentary, things like some of the increases where we saw 8% in healthcare, it was the 11% in
Retirement.
pension, right? So,
Yep.
like, I don't think those numbers are going to jump, but those were unexpected, and it'd be naive to think we're not going to see similar increases in other areas in the future, utilities, things like that. So that has me a little concerned in that we're really, really that close, and I think that's where we need to talk about either this year or think about in future years. It's hard to forecast that because we don't do anything else multi-year. How do we get closer to a number that we feel comfortable with the override making it that full 5 years? Like I said, I think we're really close, but that's, I think, where we need to adjust to make sure we feel comfortable.
Well, what about these FEFI conversations that we're having over the next, if we can make some changes to that and have some additional minor offsets of things that could be funded by FEFIs, not next year, but, as we continue to kind of work through that process, that could provide an additional slice of revenue for some things potentially.
I like the idea that we said in some places where we funded positions, we funded it for 1 year. If we said maybe our new policy is we'll fund it for 2 years out of FEFIs, like that makes a big difference in a couple different places.
And supplement it maybe the third year.
Yes,
Yeah.
my hesitation with things like that is it's speculative. There's a lot of changes that would need to happen, and all of that would come after we finalize this budget.
Yeah, no, I
So
don't
I
think
agree
we
with
could
that in
vote
the
it.
spirit of
I
that,
think
and we should do those
passed.
things anyway.
Yeah.
Just, we have to be cautious of counting on anything that we would determine after we finalize this budget.
So is it negative even if you flatten it to 5.0?
Yeah. That .08 is about $70,000. So you need to be a little bit under 5. But like I said, we're real close there, so it's,
Right.
Yeah, and that's,
you give back 350,000 each year instead of 300, and we've covered
Oh, well,
it.
that
But it's a
still isn't-
very small margin. I just want to
that's
be
still
really
only
clear there.
including 300 after this year.
Right.
Right.
So
Right.
that's right there. If
300 after this year.
comfortable raising that assumption a bit.
No, we'd get, assuming we give back 900 in FY '24,
Yep.
Yeah,
and then 300 in future years.
Right.
Right.
right, which
That's
I'm
what
saying we
you
all
said.
seem
Yeah.
pretty comfortable that we might be able to raise that 300 assumption.
Like if, in the closing fiscal
I don't know
20.
that there's,
If we look back historically, I don't know, I just think.
I think that's tough between pandemic years and then when we funded override. I don't know that you've got any kind of, enough history to project that. And so that was my next piece of my question is, if you have a recommendation of it should be something different than the 300, like, to discuss that. I think it's impossible to, it's not impossible. I think it would be inaccurate for us to look back to set go-forward projections based off of wild fluctuations and a host of things.
Yeah, my thought on that, I would agree that looking back historically is going to not be much of a predictor.
Yeah.
There isn't enough, length of data, and the times were very different.
Right.
But I do think it would be a valuable conversation for the full committee to have, and certainly a great subcommittee conversation around what are some of the scenarios for planning '25 and even '26. And I mean, in the background, and Brian, I've got a budget for fiscal '26 on my desktop.
Yeah.
Which is just a working sort of plan, how it may roll out if certain scenarios are in play. So maybe sort of sharing some of those scenarios in a more of a working forum. But, no, I was just going to say, I think it's possible to close '25 with more than 300,000.
Okay. So I was going to go a little bit the same place of some of this becomes a working conversation and maybe just ask the question of how much do we want to pursue with this tonight versus maybe there's a subcommittee discussion to work through some of it to bring it back.
Right.
Okay.
But one of the things
Thumbs up, let's do
that
it.
Brian and I spoke about today was working, trying to schedule a budget subcommittee meeting before February 29.
Yeah.
Before your vote, so we could get maybe a step ahead of that. That was one thing that we're going
So-
to throw on the table tonight.
So that's what I just suggested, and maybe we take it back, which was, what do we want to continue broadly tonight? And I guess I'll ask people outside the budget subcommittee, versus maybe a quick, we can wrap at least this piece, have some more of the working conversations in a budget subcommittee to bring back to the full group, more based on that conversation, some of our recommendations. I might suggest that, but I'm happy to keep going with this now.
I agree
That
with
feels like it might be more productive.
I think it's great to have this updated and projections forward and to see that we're within striking distance.
Yeah, I feel good. I feel like we're super close. I just wonder,
Yeah.
what other assumptions do we need to do? How much tighter do we need to get this year? Do we need to put constraints on future, not constraints, but identify that we're going to need to put some constraints on future years? So maybe we can work through that
Yeah,
in a
and I think
subcommittee.
before we leave, we can try to schedule a budget subcommittee.
Yeah, I like that
before
idea.
we
But
leave.
this is great, Tom, because I think it gets us way closer than we were kind of coming into tonight with previous calculator, with better assumptions and better numbers, so it's super helpful.
Good.
Yeah.
'Cause and I think I shared with the budget subcommittee, I know Brian's felt my frustrations. I'm sitting there at my desk, that there were several versions of this out there, and it was just driving me a little bonkers. Like, wait, which one is this? Oh,
Yeah.
So that's why I sort of, I took it offline, and I have an Excel spreadsheet, which I'd like, and Kate and I were chatting about this at the beginning, right?
Yeah,
I'd like to just, I don't want to remove history, but if we could just put the historical documents in one place and then all be working on the same one. So I was going to
I
push
think
this out.
I think
to
it's
the group.
appropriate. Yeah, let's do
Put it
that.
in
Let's
our-
I was going to push this one out as an
Subcommittee.
Excel doc,
Yeah.
and obviously it can be, we can turn it into a Google sheet, but I needed it to be, tight in one place at first.
Yep.
Done the same thing.
If I get sort of off this, still about budget, we approved, and based on the things that you had said, a lot of student programs, a lot of trips, and those things, those come out of our budget.
Not necessarily.
Oh, no, they don't.
No, usually they don't.
Yeah, there's
do they-
very,
Where do
Fee
they come out
attached.
of?
Usually there's a student fee attached to a trip.
yeah.
Right. But I know recently we had someone come and they,
So school,
The one exception,
robotics.
Yeah. Yeah, we matched the funding.
s-
But most of the time, we have with a couple different funding sources. So depending on the trip, we have, there's minimal field trip money in the budget for like class field trips. Most of that comes out of a Payne grant that gets written every year.
Right,
And then it's supplemented by parental fees.
right.
And then some of the bigger trips are funded through other Payne grants, like the Spain trip, the France trip that are coming up. Those are Payne grants that were written.
Partial funding.
Partial funding, and the
As
rest
parents
is
pay the
on the
other-
parent.
Right,
Is
portion.
on the parents, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
they usually come before us because we have a policy where we have, school committee has to approve any overnight field trips. So often they're just
Oh,
coming
okay,
for
for the
approval of an
approval of
Oh, for the
overnight.
approval, yeah.
Yeah. And then,
Okay.
we ask questions about safety and how many chaperones
Right,
and making
right.
sure. But yeah, so that's usually why they come before us, not for funding.
The other piece to that too is that we end up signing the contracts with the travel companies.
Right.
So we need school committee, that's part of the process, is that
Right.
the school committee is approving that trip.
Any other questions?
I don't know if this is premature to ask, because it seems like there's going to be a lot of work around this, but I'm just thinking like ahead in the questions we got from FinCom last year. They were in the higher fives last year, right? And they said, yikes, next year you really need to bring it down, which so far you have. If this stays somewhat true, it seems like perhaps that percent increase will maybe have to be even smaller in the coming years. So I'm just kind of throwing this idea out there. Is it, like, do you feel better about sticking with generally what we have now and then knowing in the next couple years it's going to potentially be tighter than that, or spreading that more evenly, including this year?
I think that overall, this is a very tight budget. I'm very comfortable with presenting this budget at 5.08. I think the big concern from the FinCom last year in particular was that we had all these ESSER-funded positions that they thought were then going to be just brought into the budget and increase everything. And so, they were envisioning, 6, 7, 8% increase in the budget, and I actually came in lower. So, to some degree, I think, as I shared last night, I'm proud of the leadership team for the creative thinking that we did collectively to get it to be a lower budget. I don't know what's going to happen in future years' budgets. We can look around at some of our neighbors. But at this point, I'm not interested in slashing a current budget to possibly think that it's going to have an impact on a future budget. I want to meet the needs of the kids now and next year. And this budget, I think, effectively does it.
I guess in some ways, there wasn't, like you said, there clearly wasn't an 8% increase, but some positions were pulled over. So this is
they
almost
were,
like
yeah.
a course correction year, that next year will be more of a natural progression, I guess, unless another big variable comes up.
I think the FinCom's concern, as well as the Budget Subcommittee's concern, was that we, in our previous projections on the budget calculator, felt like we needed to come in closer to 4% to make that override last. But now that we've updated the numbers and, all that, it seems like it's possible that if we stay closer to 5%, we could, and that's not a luxurious budget. It is a pretty lean budget. So I feel more comfortable going in with that. I would feel less comfortable if I did think we really needed to get to that 4% next year and the year after. And it's possible we will, but I feel more comfortable that we seem to be able to continue at that, right around that 5% and get there.
Yeah, and as-
Depending, we don't know.
Yeah, we have a very important meeting coming up at 6 o'clock next Thursday that I think will be germane to this conversation as well.
I'm impressed with the administrators, and I feel like this is a budget that they feel meets the needs of the students, is as tight as they can make it. And I'm torn because we are responsible to the taxpayers, but I think our ultimate charge is to be responsible to the students. And so, you know, a big part of me just trusts the process and that if they think that's the tightest budget they can have and still meet the needs of the students, then I'm okay with that. Okay. Further questions? Oh.
Yeah, I think just to sort of close that thought, you know, we have a month now. So, you know, I invite the school committee to dig in, and if you want to look at individual lines and ask more questions, please do. You know, I don't expect a rubber stamp on the budget. I know that's been, people have commented on that in the past, but I think that, you know, the administrative team can defend any of the positions and anything that's in the budget. If the school committee wants to see reductions, let us know. I work for you. So you want to cut the budget 10%? Let's cut it 10%. But know that that's not what the superintendent and the leadership team think is appropriate to meet the needs of the kids.
Our vote on the 29th is to change it from the superintendent's budget to our budget, and whether that's the 5.08% or if
Or
it's a
something
different number
different.
we get to over the next month.
I mean, I was tongue-in-cheek a
we're
little bit
voting.
earlier tonight when I said, well, add it. You want to add the curriculum coordinator, put it in. What's, you know, and it goes up to 5.18 maybe, something like that.
Added
Some,
a
you know, I don't know, it's not a
salary
whole
and-
lot, but, you know, as far as a percentage, but you can tell me to add things too, just as easily as take them away. It's not always a game of subtraction.
Can I clarify that? And it's going back to a small detail, but the ELA, the curriculum coordinator for the ELA curriculum that we're purchasing out of, according to this budget, out of choice funds for $212,000, are we not putting in the people to implement that? That didn't get funded through the pain?
So
The
that was, yeah.
$68,000 position that couldn't be filled?
No, because that wasn't filled, the position is still wanted and necessary, but we've had to do a lot of the professional development this year, and by getting the materials through this process, we'll be able to do a lot of the rollout on our own. But the ongoing support that position will provide is still necessary.
And is the plan that another paying grant will be written for that position?
Yeah, at this point it is, because we didn't get it in here.
I think it's also fair to say that much of that responsibility, in the absence of not having the literacy coach, shifted to Dr. Wagner, and the work that she's been able to do or has been responsible for doing since not being able to hire this person or any person. The other thing, and Tracy referenced it tonight, right? The Compass Committee is a group of teachers and educators who receive a stipend to do exactly this sort of planning and career development, and they do some testing of the curriculum. They do visits to other schools that have this curriculum in play. I think there were three curriculum vendors
They were looking at.
that they were looking at, and they've narrowed it. This Compass Group, right, receive a stipend for this work. So 212 is their recommended vendor among the three that they brought it down to. So it's been quite an extensive process to get to this point.
And I do remember them saying if, you know, the earlier they could get these materials, the better, you know, lined up they would be to implement this curriculum. So I know we had discussed about potentially, if available, funding it out of end of year FY '24 funds. as a possibility.
And
We won't know
the
that
other
yet.
possibility, just to be completely transparent, is if we get into, March and April, and obviously the budget's in firm at that point, and not approved by town meeting, but certainly firm, you folks can direct us to buy it with choice money right now. And I'm sure the Tracy and crew would love to be able to have a, 3-4 month lead, as opposed to buying it in July and not getting the materials until August, and then a big scramble come, the opening of school. So I just put that out there as a real possibility, which is why there's some flexibility in the recommendation to buy it either from choice funds or even end-of-year balances still allows us to buy it ahead of time.
Ahead of time, yeah. But it's not free money.
That's not-
so then
it's not free money,
so then
and-
that's
right,
less
and we're
we'd be
not
putting
gonna-
into
we're not gonna-
stabilization or.
That's right, that's right, yeah.
But-
All the moving parts have to land.
Would we need a change in overall policy to fund that position multi-year, or would you just ask for the amount of money?
We would change the policy.
You have to change policy, okay.
It doesn't have a year. It's the original ask of the grant is what the policy says it will honor. So if
I'm thinking of just past practice, whether it's written in the policy or not, they've said that they would fund it for 1 year.
Well, the Payne Grant Committee has their own rubric
Yeah.
as
You're
well.
talking
So
about
it
Payne
might
Grant
not be
policy?
in
Yeah,
a policy,
maybe
it
not-
might
you're
be in
talking
their
school
policy
district
rubric,
policy.
yeah.
Practice. No, so I was talking Payne Grant policy, because, I mean, if we wanted to really get the best opportunity to get someone in here for that job, and at least promise them that it would be 2 years, is that something that we would have to actually change on our end? Or can the Payne Grant ask for a 2-year position?
the applicant,
We're not sure.
I believe,
But
would
speaking
have
of
to ask.
which, if anyone's still listening, we have 2 openings on the Payne Grant Committee, so we will be putting together some language about that. But we need 2 more people on the Payne Grant Committee. A community at large member and a business representative, so we'll be trying to recruit people for that position. Okay.
Right.
New business? Motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
Moved by Diana, second by Jen. All in favor? 6-0. All right, thank you. Good night, Ipswich. Thank you.
Good night.